Would you spend thousands of dollars on supplements and special superfoods if they were just gonna make you sicker? Probably not. Thing is, this is pretty much happening to every person I know who's trying to live longer and healthier. So now I'm gonna show you why, what to do about it, and I'm going to give you a solution that will likely add years to your life, and it's probably one of the most important factors in helping this immortal CEO live forever. But first, we need to understand the case of the man who is trying to make dying optional, tech billionaire Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson had a problem. Like many before him, he was fascinated by historical figures and their contributions to humanity. But there was one threat that none of them had been able to overcome: death. So he started investing millions into figuring out ways to reverse his age. He assembled a team to scour the scientific literature about every possible thing he could do to extend his life. This all led him to doing things like limiting sun exposure, sleeping in a temperature-controlled room, taking over 100 supplements a day, stuff that most of us could never dream of having the time or money to do. But there's one thing he does that a lot of us can do. He decided to completely eliminate animal protein from his diet. You might be thinking, I thought protein was really good for you. And you'd be right. Studies show that it is. So what's going on here? To understand what's happening, we need to look at an interesting phenomenon that happened in 5 distinct areas of the world where people seem to live a really long time. In fact, there were unusually large concentrations of people who lived to be over 100 in these places. But they were all pretty random, unconnected parts of the world. One was in Costa Rica, one in Japan, one in Greece. Hell, one's even in the US, so what could they all have in common? Well, it turns out that when they looked into those different places, which are called the blue zones by the way, they noticed a lot of commonalities. Lots of physical activity, a sense of community. But here's the thing, communities having a lot of physical activity or a sense of belonging isn't that unheard of. What was something unusual that they all shared was their diets. These places consumed very little animal protein. Instead, they were getting their protein from plant sources. And if you look back at Brian Johnson's diet, that's exactly what he's done as well.
So I am vegan.
He hasn't stopped eating protein. He's just swapped out the animal sources for the plant sources. But going back to the blue zones, how can we be sure that their longevity is because of the plant protein? Maybe it's just a coincidence. Well, it turns out that the answer to that might be found thanks to a study of twins. Stanford researchers took 22 groups of twins and they assigned one twin to eat a completely vegan diet and one to an omnivore diet. They really wanted to see how people were affected by diet, even if they had the same DNA. Both diets were healthy, full of vegetables, legumes, fruits, and whole grains. The vegan diet was entirely plant-based, so no meat or animal products, while the omnivore diet included chicken, fish, eggs, the regular stuff. The study found that the vegan group saw an improvement in LDL cholesterol, insulin levels, and body weight. But there was one result that seemed to really shock some researchers. And to understand what they observed, we need to understand a little more about how our DNA works. Our DNA has these things called telomeres, which you can think of like the little plastic caps in our shoelaces. The telomeres cap the ends of chromosomes and help protect them from deteriorating. But as we age, these caps slowly get shorter, and once they go away, we get pregnant and die. Just kidding about the pregnant part, but shorter telomeres do seem to be linked to cancer, hence the, dying part. Well, it turns out that in this study, the telomeres of the vegan group got longer after just 8 weeks, while the omnivore group did not see that change. And remember, both groups were eating the healthy versions of their diets. The study concludes saying their findings suggest advantageous aging benefits for the way the vegan group was eating. But does it have to be all or nothing? If you wanted to see similar benefits, would you need to go 100% vegan? Well, in one study, they found that swapping just 3% of calorie intake from animal protein to plant protein led to a 10% decrease in death from any cause during that time period. So, why are we seeing such incredible benefits from plant proteins? One reason they might be so good for longevity is how they're packaged. They come with no cholesterol, and they're usually low in saturated fats, and they're also usually full of fiber, none of which can be said for animal protein. So it looks like people in the blue zones and Brian Johnson aren't seeing longevity benefits despite eating a lot of plant protein. It seems that a lot of their success comes as a direct result of it. So you might be thinking, that sounds great, but I don't like tofu. So how can you get the benefits of plant protein? Well, let me show you. The good news is that all plant foods have some protein, even spinach. But unless you're Popeye, spinach isn't going to be enough. So we need to identify the best plant protein sources to get the best bang for your buck. So let's play a quick game. Which of these do y'all think is a good source of plant protein? Mushrooms, eggplant, broccoli, cauliflower. I'll give y'all a second. Okay. If you watched my channel before, you know it's a trick question. those all suck. No, you're not gonna get huge eating broccoli. But I wanted to play this game to highlight just how confused people are about plant protein. So I'm gonna let you in on what are some of the best sources of plant protein. But before I reveal these foods to you, it's worth noting that in a separate study, it was found that for every 2 tablespoons of them that people ate, they reduced their chance of premature death by 8%. And these foods were called the most important predictor of survival in older people. So the absolute easiest way to get plant protein in is going to be your beans, chickpeas, and lentils. And this is a food group called legumes. And these are so easy to include in your diet. And if you're worried about gas, add them into your diet slowly, and after a week or 2, you should be okay. Whether you're eating hummus, lentil pasta, or adding beans to your salad, there's so many delicious ways to eat them, and you'll never get bored. So you might be thinking, great, I want to eat plant protein now, but I can't afford being vegan. Well, let me show you why eating to live long might actually end up being the cheapest option in the long run. And I'm not even talking about medical bills. Remember how I mentioned people are wasting thousands of dollars on supplements and superfoods to get worse results? A classic example is fish oil. This is a $3 billion industry, but experts have started to come out and say that fish oils might not be as helpful as you think, and they might even be harmful. Or take the superfood coconut oil. Health professionals are skeptical about the health benefits, and some have instructed their patients to avoid it completely. So it's tragic that people are trying to spend extra money on their health, but then those efforts end up hurting them. So you might turn around and say, but eating healthy plant protein is also quite expensive. And I understand why you would think that. Before I went vegan, when Beyond Meat had just hit the shelves, I thought, wow, this sounds cool. I'm gonna throw Beyond Meat barbecue. Yeah, my friends weren't too happy about that. I rushed to Whole Foods, loaded up my grocery cart, hit the checkout, looked at my receipt, and had a mini heart attack. This was gonna be an expensive barbecue. That was 5 years ago. For the most part, meat replacement products are still more expensive than the conventional animal protein products. But here's the thing, if you focus on buying legumes, canned or dried, you'll be spending pennies for protein, even up to 80% less by calorie than for eggs. But there are other food groups that are also a good source of plant protein and just as cheap as legumes. The first one is whole grains, which are your oats, but it can also be bulgur, quinoa, whole wheat couscous. If you're ever having white rice, think, can I replace this with a whole grain instead? The second food group I'm going to recommend looks expensive at first glance, but when you look at the price for the protein, you realize what a good deal it is. These are your nuts and seeds, with a particular emphasis on peanuts. These foods are cheap, full of healthy fats, and they're even some of the most sustainable foods out there. So yeah, you'll actually need all this money you'll be saving for all those extra years you'll be living. So now, you may have an idea of how you want to change your diet, but even long-term vegans can struggle with protein. Check out this video to crack the code with vegan protein sources, and you'll be giving Brian Johnson a run for his money in no time.